Welcome to Tales on the Towpath, the podcast where every mile tells a story.
We're two runners who spend a lot of time out here on the C&O Canal Towpath, talking about training, racing, and everything that happens between the miles.
From early morning runs to the stories that keep us moving.
This is where endurance meets inspiration, one step, one tail at a time.
So lace up and join us on the path, because every trail has a story, and this one's ours.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Adam Lowe.
And I'm Chris Earl.
And I'm Katie Lowe.
It feels like it's been a long time since we've recorded a podcast, Chris. I almost don't remember how to do this.
It really does. I was thinking the same thing earlier this week, that because we got ahead with our schedule, me being gone last week and missing that, I really missed it. I'm glad we're able to get together tonight and chat. Looking forward to see where this episode goes.
Yeah, well, the plan for the episode is, I believe we want to give some shout outs to a bunch of people who ran some other races this past weekend. And then we want to do a deep dive into your 100K race that you went and left me alone here in West Virginia to go run out west. And
Hey.
well, okay, not alone. Sorry, Katie. And then we might, if we have time, jump into a little bit of a Go One More recap, just kind of our experience watching that from over here, and then some Boston talk possibly at the very end. So I think it's going to be exciting. It's going to be a jammed packed podcast, but I wanted to start with some people who ran Cherry Blossom 10 miler in DC last Sunday. Yes, Sunday. There was the 5K was Saturday and the 10 miler was Sunday. And we had more than a few, we call them too low runners, some runners that we know who frequent our pub runs, frequent our races, come out and run with us all the time. But the first one that I wanted to give a shout out to was Fogel, who was on podcast. I'm going to get this wrong, so I don't even know why I'm trying to name it. I'll say 5. I'm probably pretty close, but he ran the 5K in 16 minutes and 44 seconds. And then he did the 10 miler, I think, in 55 minutes. And he said he forgot his watch that day. So supposedly ran with someone else's watch, but he ended up getting second place overall in the Cherry Blossom double. So that is just an amazing weekend for somebody to run a 16:44, go home, go to bed, wake up and run a 55 in a 10-mile race is just fantastic. And then we had Kate and Christy Ferguson. Both of them ran the 5K on Saturday, and then again ran the 10 miler on Sunday. So both of those people did, or I guess all three of those people did the Cherry Blossom double. Mario is just an amazing runner and still cranking out crazy times. Ran a 1:03:42, got third in his age group out of 291 people. And Cherry Blossom attracts some decent runners. Let's put it that way. I think you have to break an hour. I guess I could have looked up and see what Ben got overall, but I think Fogel ran 55 minutes and I think he was 91st place overall. So that'll tell you how fast you have to run, to compete. And then Mariah Donovan ran 1:02:22, and that was her 10-mile PR. So just about, what's that, 6:15, 6:17 pace, I think. And then Ben ran 56:47, which is just a crazy fast time. And then Grace Kaiser went sub 2 hours at Cherry Blossom, and I'm pretty sure she was happy with that time. Not to be outdone, Larry Wilson went to coastal Delaware, and he ran the 5K on Saturday, got third in his age group, woke up and then PR'd in the marathon with 4 hours and 13 minutes the next day. So he did a different kind of double. He had to outlast all those Cherry Blossom doubles and do a 5K marathon double. And then Carissa and Jeff Snyder ran the Buck to Ridge Burn half. Carissa ran 2:26 and got first in her age group, and Jeff ran 2 hours and 16 minutes. And I know that's a hard trail half marathon. I think you know a little bit more about that race than I do, Chris, but from what I've heard, it's more your style than my style.
Yeah, very rocky, and I think it had just under 1,900 feet of elevation gain over a half marathon. So those are some impressive times given the nature of the trail and the elevation gain for sure.
Yeah, so those, I mean, that's a lot of racing in 2 days, that's for sure.
I was just going to do some fact checking while Adam was talking. Fogel was on episode 11 of this podcast.
I'm sorry to the 6 people that were in between episode 5 and 11. My
Well, I
apologies.
was one of them. So, anyway,
I was probably one too.
You're on a
you
roll
probably
tonight,
were
Adam.
actually. The other thing is that race is called Buck Ridge Burn, not Buck to Ridge Burn. And I just wanted to add that Robert Kelly also ran the Cherry Blossom 10 miler. I don't know what his time was. I'm sure he was happy with it, whatever it was, but I'm also sure that he got the best photos along the course because he always does.
No, I was so impressed, like, when we were waiting at the airport on Sunday, just seeing how many people were posting their results from Saturday, but then also, their pre-race posts. It was something that got me really excited as I was getting ready to fly home, and then when I got back in the evening, just looking at everybody's times, I was just, like, blown away by how awesome they all did. What a great weekend for the Tulo group.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it was a great weather day that weekend, and the people definitely showed up for their races. Well, speaking about people that showed up for their races, Chris, you had a pretty big race on Saturday, and luckily you did not have to run into Sunday like some of these other people did back to back races, right? So, why don't you remind our listeners what race you did, and let's start with that. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, sure. So I went out to the Portland, Oregon area to a small little town called Cascade Locks and ran the Gorge Waterfalls 100K. Just an absolute amazingly beautiful place. Single track for most of the way, a few miles on the road here and there, but almost, I would say, out of the 60 plus miles, maybe 4 or 5 were on the road. So it was all pretty much single track. Just absolutely gorgeous running through old growth forests, some burned out areas where fires had gone through, and then no less than 5 waterfalls that were over 100 feet tall along the course. So just absolutely amazing. It was definitely a challenging course, being that it was, 100K, which is the first time I've done that distance, but also very rocky and a lot of elevation gain for a CNO towpath runner like myself. I think there was over 11,000 feet of gain on the day. So it was just spectacular event. I was really happy with how it went, and we'll talk more about it as we go through the episode. But that's the gist of the race that I did.
So before we talk about the race, let's talk about your week leading up to the race, and then maybe from there go into the vibe at the start line. So I know you went out a week early, right? And then so talk about your week leading up to that.
Oh yeah, so Megan, it was on spring break last week, and so we decided to go ahead and make it a full week of vacation for us. So we flew out on Sunday and we landed in Portland, and immediately Monday morning jumped in the car and we did basically a 7-hour drive down to Northern California. So we went all along the Pacific coast down through Oregon, got to see some just amazingly spectacular views along the ocean, saw some sea lions, and ended up in Northern California in the northern tip of where the redwood forests are. Man, I'll tell you what, those things are amazing. Like, we have some big trees around here, but nothing compared to what you get to see out there. So anybody who goes out that way, you have to make an effort to get down and do that. But we spent that whole week basically just doing a little bit of hiking, some waterfall trails, like I said, through the redwood forests, and just exploring and relaxing and from a training perspective, it was, at most 3 miles a day, most days only two, just enough to keep the legs moving, keep the running streak going. But then, 2 to 5 miles of hiking each day. So it was a really good opportunity to just kind of let my legs rest up, get fueled up, and be ready for Saturday. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the Pacific Northwest now.
All right. So talk about then morning of the race, getting to the start line, and then up until the point where they say go.
Yeah, I was really fortunate. We got a room in a tiny little motor lodge, basically right across the street from the start. So at 4:30 a.m., I was up and out the door and walked down the street and down the hill to where the race was starting. Of course, obviously 4:30 in the morning, everybody's got their headlamps out, and it was a little bit chilly, a little bit raining, but everybody, you could just kind of feel the energy that everybody had, that nervous energy of getting ready to do a really long day, right? And it's a lot like JFK, right? When you're starting to line up, right? Everybody's got all that anxiety, or a little bit anxious, and just waiting for the clock to tick down, right? And everybody was super supportive. Everybody was chatting it up. Like, it was just a really fun vibe. I knew it was going to be a good day, but it also was cool, right? Because this race had some pretty decent prize money. I think between the three races, the 50K, 100K, and 30K, they were giving away like $75,000 in prize money. So it brought out some talent, some folks who had run really well the year before, but also some new folks. And, I think we've talked about this before. That's one of the amazing things about this sport, is that, an average to back of the pack runner like myself can toe the same line with professionals and get to do that. And that was one of the things I was thinking about, as we were standing there waiting, because the Masters was also happening this weekend, right? And imagine trying to get a tee time at Augusta and be like, yeah, I'm just going to play with the pros. That'd be unheard of. But here we can do this, and we get to experience the same event that the professionals are doing. And it's just awe-inspiring to watch them run and get over terrain that you haven't even got to yet, at paces that just, I struggle to maintain on the canal. So
Okay, well, you mentioned that at the start line, you knew it was gonna be a good day, and I imagine that's from the vibe and the way it was, the atmosphere that was around the race, but when did you realize that you were gonna have a good day as far as the running aspect of it, or did you not have that experience?
So I would say the first time I started feeling really good about the race was about 55 miles in. Up to
Oof.
that point, you know, going into the race, I felt like my training was such that I could handle the distance. The unknown for me was how the elevation was going to affect me. Um, I'd never done 11,000 feet in a single day before, and I knew it was steep terrain. So, in not knowing how that was going to affect me, especially since some of the elevation came really early in the day, and I was a little nervous that, if I blew out my quads, at mile 17, right, that's a long way to death march after that. So I tried to keep myself pretty composed and not get caught up in the excitement early on in the race. I think starting in the dark helped, because I don't do a lot of, I've never, that was the first time I'd ever run on the trail in the dark. But then also, like, I tend to naturally run slower in the dark anyway. So I kept my pace, slower, and just trying to stay relaxed for most of it. And it was raining, so I was a little bit tentative about the slipping on the rocks and those types of things. But so that was probably really good for me. But yeah, I was pretty deep in the race before I was confident I was going to definitely make the final cutoff. Like, early in the day, I was way ahead of cutoffs and I wasn't worried about it, but I, was starting to feel the fatigue. And in any ultra, right? And especially, once you start getting to those distances, there are going to be times where you're just in a low spot, right? And for me, between 20 miles and 30 miles, I was struggling. Like, there were many times in that 25 to 30 range where I was like, I might drop. And then I was like, well, even if I don't drop, I might not make the cutoff. So it was rough for a while.
So in that moment from would you say 22 to 30, like it got tough there. Explain, like, Was that mountain section we talked about? And then what did you do to respond to that? Like, how did you get out of that 8-mile funk?
So it was, not only was it steep, the trail was rocky. And around here, when we think of rocky up on the AT, right, we're thinking like, for the most part, bigger boulders, bigger rocks, right, where you can actually step on them and you can use it to launch off of, and things like that. On this course, all the rocks were like baseball size or tennis ball size and sharp, and a lot of them were loose. So you would step on them and they would roll, or like they just hurt the bottom of your feet. So it was just constantly, just trying to make sure I didn't roll my ankle and not hurt my feet. And I think anybody who's done the JFK, for our local listeners, right? There's that section just past, when you come down on the top there, where there's like 200 yards of I think Billy refers to them as the baby doll head rocks, right? It was like that for miles on the course. And so in that section, after having done, a good chunk of the climbing from 17 to 20, to your legs are starting to hurt then, and then to just be running on that surface and just never being able to get in a groove. It was really tough. One of the things that helped get me out of it, though, as I got closer to the aid station, was just knowing that my crew was there. Megan was there. I knew she was going to be there, and she had all my stuff so I could refresh. But then we also had our friends Jeremy and Sherry, who traveled out with us, and they were just so excited because this was the first time they'd ever been to a race like this. And they were loving it. One, they just couldn't believe that I was running that far, or that people run that far. But then two, just them getting to experience the ultra community, right? Where everybody's supportive and people are cheering on, the people in the front, and then the people in the front's crew are cheering on the people who are coming in behind, because they know they're suffering just the same, right? And they just brought a new level of energy that like helped me get out of that funk. And then and they were just so supportive. Whatever I needed, they were Johnny on the spot with it, right? And just getting me in and out of the aid stations, and it was really helpful. After that point, then it was just like, okay, I've got to run 3 miles, and then I only got 3 miles until I see my crew again. That kind of stuff. Playing those mental games. So that
That
helped a lot.
that really rocky section, did you know how long that was? Or was that just like it could end in 100 feet, it could end in 15 miles? Because when we run the AT, we know the exact sections, right? Because we've been on it so many times. And I know that like when it sucks, it's only going to suck for 300 feet, right? And then I open
Right.
up again, and then there's another 300 feet section that sucks. But like in a race that I've never done before, I couldn't imagine like if you didn't know how much longer you had. So did you have any idea or?
None at all. And you would come out of a section and you'd be like, oh, thank goodness I can start to run it again. And you'd go around the next corner and there'd be rocks again. And like I said, one of the hardest parts was some of the areas had been burnt out by a forest fire back in the mid 20 teens. And none of that is obviously regrown yet. And that has resulted in there being areas where there have been landslides, and it takes it down to the rocks. Some of the rocks are pretty sturdy and mossed in and hooked together, but there are other places where you would step and the rocks would slide, and you're just like, is this it? Am I starting a landslide right now? So I get nervous on that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of very slow walking and just making sure I was careful with my footing for me. But then somebody'd come up behind you and they just fly right on by like they were a billy goat. Like, and so I'm impressed by those people who can run without fear on that kind of terrain, but that's not me.
Well, was there one specific mile or moment that really stands out to you from across the entire race?
Yeah, probably the most memorable, where I got the most emotional, was at about mile 55. That was, one, matched my previous longest distance ever. But as I was going into mile 55, my watch buzzed and I looked down and it was a text from Sarah. And I didn't take time to pull my phone out, but just the fact that, she was texting me in the middle and I was at that point in the race, it hit me pretty good that what I was doing was pretty incredible. And, I knew that from that point on, every step was a new distance PR. So I got a little emotional at that point for for a few minutes, but just
Hey,
kept
well,
going.
for our listeners, Chris, I texted you 3 times. I hope you cried each one of those times as well.
So I will tell you, Adam, that between you and the group text that was happening, your number came up first. So it looked like you texted me 300 times that day because you were also texting the guys group chat about the BPN. And so I was getting all those, and your number came up first in all those. So I was like, oh my gosh, Adam is keeping track of me today.
Well, he
I was
missed you. He was here all alone,
All
remember?
alone.
I will
Nothing to
never live
do.
that down.
That'll
Well,
be
hey,
another one of those things.
so Chris, when you were out there, I guess before I get to my question, how many people were in the 100K?
So there were over 400 that registered and started, and just over 300 and some finished. So it was a pretty big
Okay.
race.
Okay.
And it was
Were you by yourself or were you with a group of people for a lot of the time or what?
so it's funny. I don't know how I did it, but I ended up by myself for most of the race. I probably ran less than 10 of the 60 miles with someone, close enough to talk to. For whatever reason, whenever I would catch a group or a group would catch me, our paces at that moment in the race were not matching, and they would keep going. There was one gentleman, I never got his name. I didn't even see his bib number while we were running, but we ran, 5 or 6 miles together. And I tried to let him pass me a couple of times, and he was like, nope, I am setting my pace off of you.
Yeah.
That, with him setting his pace off of me, it was good because it kept me motivated because, I don't know how you guys get on the trail, but I never want to be that guy in the front that's holding everybody else up. And so it probably pushed me a little bit harder through some of those sections just to make sure I wasn't going, didn't let myself go too slow and hold him up. So
Yeah. Well, my follow-up question to that, a long-winded question answer into my original question was going to be, so when it got quiet out there and you were running by yourself, did you have any like specific thoughts or mantras or I guess like any did you listen to music? I mean, what was going through your mind when it was quiet out there?
I had no well, I took my headphones with me, but for whatever reason, I guess because of the people coming past and I wanted to be able to hear them, I never actually put them on to listen to it. So no, it just kind of depended on where I was in the race. I mean, when I was in those dark times, the only one of the few things that kept me going was just my own personal, like, I didn't want to let myself down for our running crew, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't want to come back and say, yeah, I went all the way out there for this cool race and then but didn't finish. Like, so I had to find somewhere deep inside where I could push through. I also didn't want to do that to my crew who was out there that got up at 4:30 in the morning to go down and take pictures of me at the start, and that I had sitting out in the rain waiting for me. I was like, I can't drop because of that. And I'm so glad I didn't, because once I got to mile 30, from 30 to 40, the miles just didn't seem as bad. Like, they seemed to go quicker. From 20 to 30, I thought I was out there for like 12 hours. Like, it just felt horrible. But no, I didn't have any specific mantra. Like, there was one point where, so before I had left, Adrian Wren, who was on a previous episode, I'm not going to try to guess because Katie will fact check me and get the number
I'm going
right.
to say episode 14.
She had said, she's like, when you're out there and when it gets hard, just remember, just say F it and run. And so there were a couple of times during the day where I said that to myself, and brought a smile to my face knowing that Adrian had coaxed me into that. But I will say I did probably set a personal best for the number of times I said I hate these effing rocks during
Well,
during the race.
did did I also see that you went off course at some point?
I sure did.
You wanna tell the story about that?
Yeah, that was definitely a low point early in the race. So at mile like 14 and a half, you come down and there's this amazing waterfall and you run behind it. And oh, actually, sorry, that one you kind of run across the stream in front of it. And you go across and then you start climbing up this hill. And, I guess I was thinking about the waterfall and then, knowing that I was getting close to the steep section on the course. But when you come up out of the waterfall on the trail, there was a place where the trail did a T. And at the top of the T, like it had an arrow going straight up. And if I remember correctly, it was on the left side of the trail. So in my head, that meant go left. And so I turned left. And I'm running along, and it was one of these sections that was steep and very rocky, so my eyes were glued to the ground, and I'm kind of just chugging along. And it's been a few minutes, and I'm like, man, I haven't come up on anybody, and no one has passed me. And that was early enough in the race where everybody was still kind of shuffling, right, to find where they were supposed to be. And I start looking around, and I'm like, wait, I haven't seen a ribbon on a tree in a while. And so now I'm like stopped and I'm walking and I'm looking and I'm not seeing anything. I stop, I look back, and I actually, even at that point, I called Megan. Like I pulled my phone out and I called Megan, and I'm like, I think I made a wrong turn. And I knew there was nothing she could do about it, right? Because I'm a dot on the map at that point. But I'm like, I don't know what to do because I didn't want to turn around and wait till I found someone, but I obviously didn't want to keep going if I was going in the wrong direction. But while I was talking with her, I started walking back down the hill, just trying to find a marker. And through the trees, I could see people off in the distance. And I'm like, yep, I must have gone the wrong way. So I turned back and eventually got back to the tee and caught up to where some other people were on the trail there, and got back and knew I was seeing ribbons again and that kind of thing. So it was very frustrating, to say the least, to know that I did the extra vertical gain plus what ended up being essentially a half mile out of the way and then half mile back. So technically did 63 miles in my 100K.
Well, what would have been worse would have been if you got down to the bottom and then realized that you actually had gone on the right path and had to go back up the hill. So I'm glad
Right.
that didn't happen to you. But so, Chris, before the race, you had to have had some sort of race plan going in. What briefly just tell us, like, what was that race plan going in? And then did you stick with that, or how did you modify or change that throughout the race?
Yeah. So I think we talked about that, my super A goal was to be able to run it in about 12 and a half hours. So that would have been like 12-minute miles. And I knew that that was, around here, that would certainly be reasonable, right? But I just, again, didn't know what the elevation was going to be. So that was my A goal. My B goal would have been 14 hours. And then C goal was to just make sure I finished under the cutoff, right? Through the first, 12 miles, I was sub 12-minute pace. Everything was going good. So, and it felt easy. Even though there was some elevation, it was a good mix of walking up the hills and then, being able to run at a decent pace on the rest of the course. But then in that 20 to 30 section, there was a lot more walking just because of the nature of the trail and how steep it was. And so my average pace dropped pretty quick, right? And eventually, by the time I got to 25 miles or so, I knew I was not going to hit that 12-hour mark unless something just magical happened in the back half. But I thought, it's more likely I'm going to slow down. At some point, probably around 25 to 30, I adjusted my time goal and was just like, let's shoot for 15-minute miles, 14 to 15-minute miles for the rest of the day, knowing that there was still a lot of elevation to go, and, hopefully would be able to run faster on some of the flatter sections, but knowing that the elevation was going to slow me down. For the most part, that worked okay. I only had a few miles that were too far north of 15 minutes per mile, but I definitely found that my stride changed a lot during the race, and it went from running to more of a shuffle. And I don't know if like I adapted just naturally to that, but it did make it easier for me to be able to go up hills without putting so much strain on my quads. I don't know if it was faster than walking, but in my head it felt faster.
And one thing I don't think we've mentioned too much of is how did you handle fueling for the race?
I took probably 5 pounds worth of gels with me on the airplane. Like, I actually was worried that my luggage was gonna be overweight because of how much was there. I think over the course of the day, I probably had between 10 and 15 gels, and they were a mix of goo Roctane and the Cis Beta from SIS, and that seemed to work really well. I tried to eat a little bit of solid food when I would go through the aid station, so like peanut butter and jelly squares. At one point, I got a slice of quesadilla and some chicken soup broth. But for the most part, most of my fueling came from my tailwind and the gels I was taking. From a tailwind perspective, I want to say it was about 7 liters of tailwind over the course of the day. I was taking 2 bottles with me, 2 500 ml flasks at each of the aid stations through the first 4 or 5 aid stations, and then I started carrying 3 with me when the distance between aid stations got longer. I say 7, it was probably 7 liters of total of fluid and probably 5 liters of tailwind, because I did start mixing in just water at some points.
Chris, will you walk us through, I guess, or run us through miles 55 to the end?
55 to the end was a mix of rolling terrain. And rolling terrain out there meant, like 200-300 foot climbs instead of, 700-800 foot climbs. But, at 55, I started getting excited because I knew at that point, unless something went really wrong, right, I was gonna finish in close to 15 hours. And so that was a good motivator for me. One of the things that I found really hard throughout the course of the race was between some of the aid stations was like 10 miles. And, if we go out on a Sunday run day, right, and do a 10-mile run on the towpath, that's 80 minutes max most of the time, sometimes 75, sometimes 85, but we're always under an hour and a half, right? But out there, 10 miles was 2.5 hours. And that was really hard to think about, like when at 10 miles out to the aid station and 10 miles back, oh, that's going to be 5 hours, right? So that was a little mentally challenging. But when I got to mile 50, right, and only had, because I had done the extra mile, I now had a half marathon to go. Doing that math of knowing that, like, okay, if I can do this in 3 hours and 15 minutes, I'm going to break 15 hours. And so when I got to mile 55, that was one of the things that really kept me going was, okay, I do this mile and then I do the math and be like, okay, it looks like I'm on 14:56 now, or I'm going to be 15:02 now. So I got to pick it up a little bit. The last aid station was at mile 60 for me, 59 for everybody else. And so there basically was a 5K from the last aid station to the finish. And it was 1.5 miles out on trail. And then the last 1.5 miles back was on the road. And so once I got to that last aid station, I had told my crew, I'm like, I want to change my shirt. I want to change my hat. And I said, I want 2 water bottles and I'm dropping the vest. And that's all I'm taking with me. So I got into the aid station, did that quick change. I was in and out really quick. The people who were there were like all, super excited, right? Because, they're like, you're basically at the finish, and it's all this, LFG, let's go. So I take off and I've got 32 minutes, I think, to break 15 hours. And so I take off on the trail and I'm making good time. And at about a half a mile or a mile from the aid station, the trail's real narrow. And one of the things that was real hard on this course was it's a lot like the red trail on Fire in the Mountain, that the trail's single track. And then when it falls off, it falls off. Well, I'm running along. I had seen this person was in front of me and I wasn't racing them, but I was using them as a guide, right? Like I'm going to try to close the gap on them just to keep myself motivated. And I'm running along trying to catch them. And I come around and through a corner and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, I look off down below the trail and the person had fallen off the trail. So they're like 6 to 8 feet down below the trail laying in the briars. And I'm like, I stop, obviously, right? And I'm like checking on
Oh,
them.
don't say obviously, because I would have had to think twice if I would have stopped or not. I'm just kidding, everybody. I probably would have stopped to help.
You absolutely would have stopped, but you would have been thinking about the, "Oh my gosh, I'm right on pace. I'm not gonna make it now." But no, that was, I don't wanna say the least of my concerns, but I was like, "I have to make sure she's okay." Right? And as I stopped, she's getting back on her feet, and so we talked for a minute, and, she was okay, and I was like, "Do you want me to try to help you get back up the bank?" And she just looked at me, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I will try. And she's like, no, I'm not ready. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, I'll stay here. And she's like, at that point, she was like, no, I'm fine. You just go ahead. I'll get up the bank. And I was like, I didn't really want to go, but I know if I was that person who had fallen, I wouldn't have wanted anybody to stop and stay either. So because she seemed like she wasn't hurt or whatever and just needed a minute, I was like, okay. And I took off and kept going. But it definitely was in the back of my mind the rest of the way, like, oh gosh, I really hope she's okay. I did end up seeing her at the end of the race and she was fine. She was just scratched up. But so anyway, at that point, right now I'm starting to think, what if I don't break 15 hours? Because A, I ran an extra hour or extra mile, and B, right, who knows how long I actually was there, talking to her. But I'm like, what if those are the couple of seconds? I'm like, well, there's only one thing to do about it, and that's pick it up. So when I got off the trail and onto that last mile and a half of road, I felt like I was flying. I'm sure it still was only like, for the most part, 10-minute miles, 9-minute miles. But it just felt so good, right, to be able to open it up and stride out. There was still a little bit of climb, but I breezed right through it. I passed a few people, and at the end, right, even though the legs hurt so much, you get that adrenaline rush, and you can push through. It's kind of like at JFK, right, when you're coming down the last hill. No matter how bad the legs hurt, you find that energy to go a little faster. And so that's what I did. And rolled in, and I didn't even look at the clock. I just ran right through the chute, but as soon as I did, everybody was like, you broke 15, and they were happy and I was happy. And one of the other things about breaking 15 was it meant I finished before it got dark again. So I was happy about that because I wanted to be able to see what the area looked like. Because it was dark in the morning. So, but yeah, no, it was good. Got a few pictures, and then we headed out and went and got a celebratory beer and a little bit of food, and then crashed out in the hotel.
How long did it really take you after the race for it all to sink in?
I think for me this time, and this is not normal, but for me, it was almost immediate. Just when I crossed the finish line, and my crew, like I said, Jeremy and Sherry and Megan, they were so amazing. They were as happy as if they had finished it, right? Like it was just a great moment of celebration. We got some pictures together. For me, just like thinking about the fact that knowing how much I wanted to quit at mile 30 and how much my feet were hurting and things like that. I was just so excited to that I hadn't dropped and that I pushed through. And yeah, I couldn't wait to tell people about it.
So, Chris, next year, 2027, if you were to run this race again, what would you do differently?
Oh, that's a great question because I thought about this a lot during the race. The number one thing, and I'm gonna make Katie's heart sing here, is strength training. It was obvious.
Mhm.
It was obvious in those first, 15, 20 miles. My legs are not built for running that kind of elevation. And it is something I'm interested in doing, is running more courses like that. They're going to have a lot of elevation, but if I'm going to do it, I've got to build my leg strength. And then just running more hills, during training, finding time. Like the Tuesday trails were great, but like, leading up, because the winter was so cold this year, right? We couldn't get out on the trails as early as I needed to. I would definitely need to find a way to get out and get that elevation training in sooner than I did this year.
You've kind of mentioned it, but we were gonna ask you about how this might change your training, but what about your goals, on the other hand? Have you shifted any goals or made new ones based on what happened this weekend?
So it's amazing how many times I shifted my goals during that race. I- when I was struggling, one of the reasons I picked this race was because it was a Western States qualifier, and I wanted to get into that process of collecting lottery tickets so that eventually someday I might be fortunate enough to run that race. But man, I'll tell you, between miles 20 and 30, I was like, I don't want to run Western. That's got even more elevation and it's longer and whatever. But by the time I finished, and now that I've had some time to think about it, if I can actually do the training I need to do and start incorporating more strength training and more trail running like that, I think it has motivated me even more to want to do Western States or some of the bigger races that folks get excited about.
All right, just a couple more quick questions for you, Chris. What was the best moment of the day?
The best moment was coming through town, finally being able to open it up at the finish and knowing I was going to make it. That was the happiest I was during the day. I think, as we talked about earlier, that moment when Sarah texted me, that was really uplifting for me. And then just each of the times I got to see my crew, it was such an immediate, just like energy boost, knowing that they were there supporting me and that no matter how bad it was, they were excited for me. And so it was just it was a great day, even though it was really hard.
Well, you definitely answered that like I would have, because that was at least 3 moments of the day. However, how about the worst moment of the day?
So I'm gonna go with two on this one. The When I realized I was going the wrong way, that was a pretty low moment. And I was pretty mad for a mile or two after that. Probably ran a little harder than I should have. But I was like, I got to make up time. And I was frustrated. But yeah, I don't remember exactly what mile it was. Probably in the 27, 28 range where it was real dark and I was thinking about dropping. That was not pleasant for me just mentally. So
Do you know the interesting thing is that you've said a couple times about dropping at that moment of the race. But I would imagine being in the middle of this forest somewhere, it's not like you could just sit down and just say, I'm done, right? So, like, how much further was it to the next aid station where you could possibly have dropped?
mile 33. I
So
had
you
it
still
mapped out. I
had
knew.
So you had 6 miles to deal with those dark thoughts and demons, but you also had 6 miles to, like, work it out and realize that, like, life wasn't over, and that was probably a good thing because if the aid station was at mile 28, you might have dropped, right? But
Yep.
by the time you got there, you realized, okay, it's not all doom and gloom. So that because it's interesting, right? It's not like you were running a 24-hour race on a track where you saw your crew every 400 meters and dropping was a possibility. You had to work through that.
Absolutely. One of the things I thought about a lot during the race was if it had been a looped course, I probably wouldn't have made it because it would have been really hard to go back out knowing you had to run the exact same thing over again. Eventually, right, I will run an ultra that is a looped course and, it will be something I will be better prepared for now that mentally I need to be, ready to say no, kind of like in a last man standing or last one standing event, right? Like when you're in the chair, you don't quit in the chair, you don't quit when you finish the loop.
That's what happens to a lot of people at Canal 100, like at mile 70 when they come back and they're like, I don't want to do 30 more miles on the same course that I've already done 70. So that's like you were just saying on that looped course thing. It's way easier to quit then than it would be if they were 6 miles out in the woods by themselves. There's really nowhere to go.
Yeah, one of the aid stations at mile 50, right, there were people who had passed me 15, 20 minutes earlier in the run or more, and I would see them still sitting in the chair when I got to the aid station and I got back out before them. I'm sure a lot of them ended up dropping there because I think 25% of the people in the race ended up dropping roughly. So it did help a little bit to know that, I got back out and I was doing okay when or help that to know that other people were suffering too. Right. Like, and so you
Yeah.
can do what you got to do to get through it. So
Well, Chris, we got your 3 best moments of the day, 2 of your worst moments. So now we just need one word to describe the race overall.
hard.
Hard. Okay. I like it.
And honestly, like, as I've sat here and listened to you talk about this race, I've had a lot of Highland Sky 40 flashbacks, and I think one of my mantras about that race is that I'm very glad I did it, but I'm glad I don't have to do it again. What are your thoughts on doing this race again?
So I think, yeah, that's a tough one. I love the area, but those rocks, those rocks were so hard. But Katie, you nailed it with the Highland Sky because there were times during the day where I was like, this is exactly like Highland Sky with less road and more rocks and less water. Like there were less places where I had to run through ankle deep mud,
Right.
but the rock fields and things like that that just made it so tough to actually get in a groove were tough. But yeah, I made a lot of comparisons that day and thought about you and Adam a lot during the race.
Well, Chris,
Yeah,
I
even if it
can
was a negative thought.
Yeah.
I I can tell you from experience, it takes about 8 days to go from I'm never doing that race again to maybe to all right, I'll sign up next year. So
Yeah.
give it 2 more days and you might be there.
Yep. Yep. You might
What
be
are
right on that.
you know,
Capital.
I know what you're talking about, but we have not said you're signing up next year. I heard it
Oh,
here
sorry.
first.
Sorry. We haven't, but
The mouse in his pocket and he have decided.
I bet you and Chris talked about it.
oh, we would have if he didn't leave me alone.
Yeah, right.
Well, hey, Chris, before we move on, is there any maybe anything you didn't get to touch on that you wanted to about the race or any closing thoughts you had from your trip out west that you wanted to share with our listeners real quick?
I think that the last thing I would leave is if anybody is interested in doing this race, it was really well done from a professional standpoint. The race directors and crew that were out there, they just did a fantastic job, right on par with any 2-0 event, that's for sure. I had just a great time. The pre-race registration and all that was super smooth and they put on a fantastic race, and they had photographers out on the course. One of the things that was cool is the photographers don't charge you for the photos. They just ask for an acknowledgement. So I've got a couple of photos of me in cool places that I'll be able to share. And so anyway, I nothing against photographers who charge, right? Like everybody's got to make a living, and I appreciate that more than anyone. The last thing I just wanted to mention was the aid stations were fully stocked, all those kinds of things. Like there were no hiccups along the way that I saw at all. The race directors and team and crew were there for the last finishers well after dark, at the end. And that was true for all 3 days. They did a great job of doing race recaps on YouTube and all those things. So it was really fun. It was a neat to be a part of that kind of event, and then to have that kind of stuff documented on YouTube to be able to go back and watch later will be fun. So yeah, just a huge shout out to them.
Well, that sounds like an amazing weekend, an amazing week, I guess, right? And then before we move on to the Go One More Ultra at BPN, you finished the race Saturday, right? And
Yes.
then you flew home Sunday and went to work on Monday.
Monday.
Yeah, that sounds horrible.
Yeah. To be on West Coast time and then get up and have to be at work, by 7:30, 7:45, which was, 4:30, 4:45. It's for the week I had just adjusted to. Was a little rough. And then of course, just dealing with the swelling and the soreness in the legs for the last couple of days has been fun. But it's been good because all my coworkers have been making fun of me and, making sure that I know I did that to myself, not because of anything else.
All right, Chris. So you ran on Saturday, flew home Sunday, worked on Monday. Listen, while you were doing all that, there was a race going on in Texas, the Go One More Ultra, that started, I believe, Friday at noon. They started running. They were still running on Saturday when you ran your race. They were still running Sunday when you were flying home. And I think they were still running Monday when you went to work. So they ran for 73 yards or 73 hours. A total of 306.6 miles is what it took to win that race. Mark Dowdle won. Overall, he outlasted Kendall and the rest of the field. Kendall was one of the guys last year that tied Kim because of some rough weather that they had last year, and not to be outdone weather-wise this year. I know they had a ton of rain during the event, turning the dirt course into basically a huge swamp or mud pit. So I spent about 3 days popping in and off Instagram Live trying to watch this when they came up on the hour every hour, just, seeing how many people were finishing and starting. I know they started with 145 runners, and after 3 full days, they were down to two. And then a couple hours later, Mark pulled out the win. So it was pretty exciting to watch on Instagram Live, and just to cheer those guys on and watch them go 300 miles. I think in mine, I did 112 and I was completely spent. So they weren't even halfway through their warm up at that point. They went 2 more days after I called it a quit. So shout out to those guys. Chris, did you get any opportunity to pay attention to that while you were out in Oregon and coming back?
So I definitely was watching a little bit on Friday before before my race, right? And excited. But at that point, right, everybody's in it and nobody's dropping. So it's just a matter of like watching to see when the first person is going to drop, right? But then one of the things that was really cool is when I finished the race and texted you guys that I was done, Bradley responds back with, "Well, to catch you up, here's where they are, and they're at blah 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 miles, and there's this many people left." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome." So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
You,
just
you took
tried to keep track of it
just
as I was at the airport.
right, just under 15 hours for your race, and these guys did 73 hours. So, I mean, obviously a much different
Wow.
terrain, much different, course and race format. But just when you sit down and you think about like the amount of time that they were on their feet and running, and it's just incredible to go that far and go that long without stopping, basically.
Yeah, and I can say I went all 15 hours and I ended up with 0 blisters. So shout out to Creeper Socks. But I don't know if you saw pictures of Mark's feet when he first took his socks off. Oh my God.
Yeah, they were pretty nasty. I saw them. Katie, have you seen them?
Nope, don't want to.
Some of those blisters were bigger than my ankle.
Yeah, they were pretty gross. So that was the BPN Go One More Ultra down in Texas. I think they're already have some dates for next year. It'll be the same weekend. So what was that, like April 10th, 11th, 12th, that sort
Yep.
of time frame. And I think this year they had 5,000 people enter the lottery for 160 spots or something like that. So if you're interested in doing that race, good luck, because you'll need to get into the lottery.
But if you want to practice for that race, Adam, how could they do that?
Oh yeah, we only have 5 spots left in the More Miles Last One Standing Challenge that takes place May 28th until it ends. And that's at Manadokin Camp here in Knoxville, Maryland, near the Sharpsburg area. But yeah, so we have, I think there's 80 people signed up for the true last one standing, the 4.167 mile course. And there's 15 people signed up to do the 1 mile version of the race. Included in that lineup is Scott Snell, who's done Big's Backyard. He's won Capital Backyard, but we've been told that he is running and pacing his son during the event. His son is 14. So it'll be interesting to see if we could kind of coax him into lasting and staying on the course. But there are some bigger names that are coming, some big names that are coming back, and some people that are coming back that have much loftier goals than what they've had before. So it's shaping up to be a record breaking day. Samir has the record with 26 hours, so 108 miles. And we're hoping to shatter that this year. And I have it on record that Samir is coming back, although he's not signed up yet. So maybe by the time this podcast comes out, he'll be signed up. because
Can I sign up 4 more times and make it really interesting?
that would be funny. Yes.
Just kidding, Samir.
You could sell them one of your spots. Hey, that
Pretty sure
reminds me.
Dulo has a no transfer policy, right?
Oh, yeah. A shameless plug here. We're trying to get the ability to go live on Instagram. So we are only like 200 followers away from being able to do that. So if you can go on Instagram and make like 30 accounts and follow Tulo on all those accounts, we could promote the race live during it. Is that not a good idea, Katie?
I was just gonna say, Too Low Run Co. is what you're looking for.
Oh yeah, they might need to know what the account is to follow it,
Yeah.
right?
We'll put
2,
it
the
in the
number
show
2.
notes.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, perfect.
that'd be
Well,
best.
so that's going to be fun. The 1 mile race goes about 32 hours. That's almost guaranteed to go that far. And last year we almost had the 4 mile version match the 1 mile length. So we're hoping that it matches and goes beyond this year so we can, reach new heights and get people to go further than they have before.
That's awesome. I can't wait. So, Adam, before we close out, I think we've got one more race to talk about, right? You are getting ready to head north up to Boston and for the Boston Marathon on Monday, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are going into that?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm 100% ready to race a marathon yet. My legs have still been feeling kind of sluggish, but I don't know if it's like the sudden amount of heat that we've had the last couple of days, or the fact that I just am not good at running right now, or like Capital took more out of me than I would like to think. But like I finished
Have you
Capital.
have you been doing anything different in the meantime?
Well, so I finished Capital and I had like what Chris thought, like, man, weight training could really help me. So the next day I lifted legs, and then like I've done legs like 3, maybe 4 times since Capital. So 2 weeks ago. And I
Mm.
ran like 45 miles and then 75 miles last week. So it's not like I've taken a break or like taking it easy. So I'm hoping that kind of is what's going on. So a couple easy days and then I should be ready. But I am just excited. This will be my 7th time running Boston. It never has, I mean, it hasn't gotten old yet. I'm just really looking forward to getting on the starting line. And, I love the crowd, the energy of Boston, and I'm just really looking forward to that. We leave Saturday morning. We drive up with the CVAC group, Mike Spindler and his group of athletes. We go with them. We get to Boston late Saturday night, and then Sunday we hit the town and go to the expo. And one of my favorite things to do at the expo is to leave the expo and we go across the street, and there's this little red tavern that I'm gonna mess the name up, Brokowski's, right?
I think that's it.
Okay. That's like my favorite place. We go there and there's a Tulo sticker on the wall from 2021 when we went. We've been back every year. They have the Sam Adams 26.2 beer. We sit there and get a couple beers the day before the race, and that place just screams Boston to me, so I really like it. And then yeah, the race is on Monday, and then Monday night we'll be back at what, Pete's Pizzeria for some after. Is that what it's called? Pete's
It
Pizzeria
used
or
to be
something?
called Bill's, but
Oh
then
yeah,
it changed.
Bill's. Yeah, I think that's close. Oh, I think it's Bill's Pizzeria.
Yeah, we just always
Anyway,
called it Bill's, but last year
yeah,
I think it had a different name,
yeah, but
but
we go back there. It's like right at the start line in Hopkinton, and we go back there afterwards and have some celebratory beer. And last year we played music bingo or something.
bingo. It was
That was
so
like,
much fun,
yeah,
and it's
yeah. So
always the same bartender. Always.
yep, for the last 5 years, I think. So
Yeah.
headed into Boston, the goals will be to go sub 3, just because that's what I like to do. If I can't do that, then I will find some college kids at mile 21 that have some Bud Light, and I will make sure that my fastest mile is through the Wesley Girls College, so Katie doesn't think I stopped to kiss any girls. So
Have we told that story on here?
that's for a different podcast. We're running out of
Yeah,
time.
we can do it on your recap.
Yeah, but no, I'm looking forward to it. It's just like any. This is gonna sound dumb, right? It's just like any other marathon to me. Like I just love that distance, and I love getting to the starting line and feeling hopefully semi-fresh, and then just seeing what I have that day. And I've done enough now to where like if everything goes right, it goes right, and if not, then like I enjoy learning, like how to adjust and mix it up and struggle and take the lesson somewhere else. So I'm looking forward to it one way or the other.
Well, I know I'm looking forward to following you that day, and you and some of the other Tulo folks who will be there. So, and I'm sure Katie's really excited about getting to be up there and experience it as well. So,
Yeah. Hey,
Oh, yeah.
two things real quick. So one year, like what did I not run last year?
Oh my
Last year was
gosh, why do you keep
Oh
saying
yeah, I
that?
keep forgetting. Chris, I ran so good last year that I forget I ran. So 2 years ago, 2 years ago, I didn't run and I had to help Katie do her job. It was horrible. I will never, I will run every year. That's so much easier than crewing at Boston. It was a nightmare. So that's why last year I ran so fast because I didn't want her to wait and have to like be like out there. I hated crewing. I didn't hate it. It was hard though. It was hard.
W We can talk about it next time, definitely more
Okay.
details, but
Yeah.
it is a job, and it's not always getting to see a lot of the Boston Marathon, if that makes sense, but we could
Yeah.
just leave that for next week.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to follow me during the race, I know you can download the BAA racing app and my bib number is 5243, which is fitting because this will be my last race as a 43-year-old. So 5243.
so before we close out, I don't know if you saw the article this morning, but Sarah Hall is also getting ready to run Boston as a 43-year-old, and she's doing something very similar to what you did last year, and that I think this will be her fifth marathon in less than 3 months. So I think she was probably inspired by you last year.
So I was thinking about this today. Like when I went for my run, I was thinking about like how tired I was thinking my legs were. And I was like, wait, last year when I ran Boston, I had run 3 marathons in like the 14 days before it. So certainly my legs had to be more tired than they are now. And then I just start thinking I'm being a baby and I need to suck it up. And like, but then I'm like, well, wait, I don't want to suck it up. I just want like my, it doesn't matter. Okay, let's end this episode, Chris. So
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate getting the opportunity to talk about my race experience. And again, to all our Tulu friends, great job this last weekend. It was so exciting to be able to see your results as I was flying back.
yeah, and Chris, I am happy you're back because I missed you.
Aw.
I cannot wait to see you at the pub run tomorrow.
And he's gonna be all alone all weekend in Boston, it sounds like.
No,
Well, I
Mike
mean, I'm
Spindler
gonna be
said
there, but I was also here last week, so
Mike Spindler said we can share a room this year.
yeah, the honeymoon suite.
Oh,
Well, anyway, guys, thanks for having me on again. I just wanted to fact check one more item. Adrian and Bruce were episode 17, just to circle back.
all right, perfect. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We will be back next week, probably with some Boston recap and some other topics. Who knows? Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. That's all for today's episode of Tales on the Towpath. Thanks for joining us on another run down memory lane and along the C&O. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to follow, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep your pace steady and your stories flowing.